Union leaders and public officials are held to similar standards. Both are required to act in the best interests of others. When they violate that duty in order to enrich themselves, it's a federal crime. When they conspire together to do so, it's a federal crime. Yesterday, Local 98 business manager John Dougherty and Philadelphia City Councilman Bobby Henon were indicted by a federal grand jury, along with 5 Local 98 employees. Their names are Brian Burrows, Michael Neal, Marita Crawford, Nico Rodriguez, and Brian Fiocca, as well as 1 local business owner, Anthony Massa. It is a 116-count indictment, which will be provided to you after the conclusion of this press conference. The charges are varied, but they include conspiracy to embezzle labor union funds, conspiracy to commit honest services fraud, wire fraud theft from Local 98 and from a political action committee, falsification of labor union financial records and reports, federal program bribery, making false statements to the FBI, and related tax charges. With regard to the embezzlement charges, the indictment alleges that John Dougherty and co-defendants conspired to embezzle Local 98 money for their own personal benefit and to benefit their families, their friends, and their commercial businesses. The indictment also alleges that the defendants concealed their embezzlement by falsifying documentation to make it appear as though the expenses were union-related so that the union would pay. For example, the indictment alleges that John Dougherty and co-defendants Brian Burrows and Michael Neal used Local 98 dollars to pay for construction and repair projects on their own homes, and that the paperwork was falsified by contractor Anthony Massa to look like the work was done on Local 98 properties so that the union would pay. The indictment charges that John Dougherty and co-defendants spent thousands of Local 98 dollars on expensive family meals, and that the paperwork was falsified to make it look as though the expenses were related to union business and, in some instances, union charitable donations, so the union would pay. The indictment alleges that John Dougherty and co-defendants spent thousands of Local 98 dollars on personal items for themselves and their family members, including food, baby supplies, dog food, hairstyling items, and much more, often using Local 98 employees to make those purchases and do other personal errands on Local 98 time, and that paperwork was falsified to make it look like the expenses were related to union business so the union would pay. And the indictment alleges that John Dougherty spent Local 98 dollars to place family members on the union payroll, even when those family members were on vacation, enrolled in school full-time, or otherwise were not working for the union, so that the union would pay. The bottom line is that this indictment alleges that John Dougherty and his co-defendants used Local 98 funds as their own, paying for their personal travel, meals, shopping, parties, home improvements, and much more, ultimately costing the union and its hardworking members over $600,000. This indictment also alleges that John Dougherty rewarded businessman George Peltz with lucrative contracts because Peltz gave him expensive gifts. The indictment charges that Dougherty steered millions of dollars of work towards Peltz's business in exchange for gifts from Peltz, including a security system for Doc's Union Pub, which was installed for free, large-screen televisions at John Dougherty's home and the homes of family members that were installed for free, and security systems that were installed for free. The indictment alleges that this exchange of contracts for personal gifts was an abuse of the trust placed in Dougherty as a leader of a labor organization, and that it was a federal crime. So where does Philadelphia City Councilman Bobby Henon fit in? This indictment charges that John Dougherty used Local 98 dollars to pay Philadelphia City Councilman Bobby Henon so that Henon would do his bidding from his seat on City Council. Now, this indictment does not allege that city councilmen are prohibited from receiving private income, but it does allege that a public official who accepts that money in exchange for taking actions on behalf of a third party breaches the duty of honest, faithful, and disinterested service that the public official owes to the people he serves. That is what is alleged here. This indictment charges that Robert Henon received a Local 98 salary and other benefits from John Dougherty in exchange for Henon advancing Dougherty's personal, professional, and financial agenda. For example, the indictment alleges that when Dougherty was upset that non-union labor was installing MRI machines at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, Henon got involved and tried to use his influence as a city councilman to stop the work because John Dougherty told him to. The indictment alleges that Henon used his position to threaten Dougherty's opponents from other unions because Dougherty told him to. The indictment alleges that Henon opposed an audit of the Philadelphia Parking Authority and delayed legislation because John Dougherty told him to. This indictment also alleges that Dougherty used Henon's position on city council to pursue personal vendettas, that when an employee of a towing company tried to tow John Dougherty's car and would accept only cash to release it, the indictment charges that John Dougherty sought revenge and told Henon he needed to take action against the towing company. In response, the indictment alleges that Henon had a member of his staff draft a resolution to hold public hearings to investigate the operations of that towing company. In essence, the indictment alleges that Henon abdicated his duty to provide honest services to the citizens of Philadelphia because he made decisions on behalf of John Dougherty rather than the people who elected him to city council. This 116-count indictment lays out in great detail allegations that over a 6-year period, John Dougherty and his co-defendants used Local 98 influence and funds entrusted to them by the hardworking members of this union to line their pockets, pay their family members, fix up their homes, go on personal trips, and eat expensive meals, all unrelated to union business, but paid out of union bank accounts. And that John Dougherty also used Local 98 funds to pay City Councilman Robert Henon, not because Henon was working for the union, but so that Henon would pursue Dougherty's personal, professional, and financial goals from his seat on City Council. This activity is charged to have violated federal law, and this indictment seeks to hold these defendants accountable. Now, before I pass on the microphone, a few matters. First, for those of you wondering why I'm standing here today, I'll tell you that the U.S. Attorney is recused from this investigation to avoid any conflicts or even the appearance of any conflicts stemming from representation while he was in private practice at the Drinker Biddle law firm.